So I'm here for our third talk, but first, Mary Adele Stewart, she's back there, and she's with our volunteers who made all the food. So can we stand up and thank them? Really, it is, weeks of planning and buying food, so God bless them for their work. So the third talk, so first was, what is a prophet? And all these prophecies about this new type of community that the Christ would start. But the community is supposed to be countercultural, is supposed to not fit into the world. I do love that one. Now, just going off of my opinions. So I was at dinner with some people, and gosh, I rarely go out to dinner with people. I'm a morning person. I work 4 nights a week. Really, I don't want to go out at night. I work most nights. So if I go out to dinner, it's really because I want to fall in love with the people at the dinner. And I really believe if you spend enough time with people, you'll fall in love. So anyhow, we're at dinner, and 2 people get into a political argument. And it really ticked me off. Not that I don't have political opinions, it just ticked me off because I consider politics down here. I consider love and unity far more important. And I have friends who I'm really close to, we all have different political opinions, yet we love each other. We don't have to argue. I think love and community is far more important. And so, yeah, the second talk was about being countercultural, but that doesn't mean you have to be opinionated or can't, if you're countercultural, just because somebody has a different opinion, who cares? Love them anyway. But I do believe in the virtue of being stubborn about your values, but not provocative, countercultural, but you don't have to be provocative. The third thing about prophets is they spoke a lot, though, about the politics of their time. They called out corruption. But my talk is not going to be about that. The other thing they talk a lot about as well is worship. Remember, the prophets were sent because they can hear God. They can hear God, and God, when there's abuses, even in worship, God speaks out. And so I want to focus on the prophet Amos because my grandfather's name was Amos, so that seems like, and my middle name is Amandus after that grandfather. It's a great name to have, Leonard Amandus McMillan. You know that kid's going to turn out to be a nerd. So, anyhow, so Amos, the book of Amos is actually the first of the 12 minor prophets. By minor, we don't mean that he's lesser, just that it's a smaller book. So he prophesied 800 years before Jesus, and he was a prophet of the northern kingdom. Now, little bit of background. So we're going to get into history of the north versus the south. So the northern kingdom is Israel. The southern kingdom is Judah. And what happened is that there was one country, Israel, but King Solomon starts out with wanting wisdom, but he really becomes corrupted by power and money. And he builds a temple to the God who frees slaves using slave labor. So you can hear how something's terribly wrong, right? So Solomon made himself this abusive pharaoh and has all these kind of corruption seeping in. And because of that, there's this huge divide and split. And so 10 of the tribes split away from 12 of the tribes. So, 10 from the other 12. So the 10 sort of band together up north and create their own kingdom. And the shorthand for that kingdom is Israel. Now, I know it's all Israel, but Israel is just shorthand for the north. The southern tribes consisted of really three tribes, Judah, Benjamin, and the Levites. But the Levites, they're stuck with the temple, so they're not really in this division. Benjamin is a really tiny tribe. So the southern tribe is Judah. Have you ever heard of what they call Jews? That's because they're from the tribe of Judah. So all Hebrews are not Jews. Only 12, one of the 12 was Jews. Does that make sense? Okay, so the southern tribes, they kind of band together. And the Levites are there. And there's all these tribes in the north. But the problem is you have this division. But then Solomon's son, oh my God, Rehoboam, he is elected king. And there's another dude that shows up, Jeroboam. Their names sound the same. But he was this effective bureaucrat with Solomon's kingdom. And the divide happens, and God chooses Jeroboam, the administrator, to lead the northern tribes. Back in the southern tribes, God gives Solomon's son, Rehoboam, who's heir to the throne, he wants him to be benevolent and merciful and just and serve the people. And so God gives him a chance. And the elder men of wise men come to him and say, no, God will be on your side if you act justly, do what's best for the people, be fair, be benevolent, fall in love with the people. And he thinks, that's a good idea, but let me go ask my trust fund drinking bros. And they come up with a different plan, that no, you should let them know you're king and dominate. So he said, if my father ruled with iron, I'll rule with, with stone, I'll rule with iron. I'm going to make life 10 times tougher on people, and you'll recognize I'm king. So, that's going to go bad for the south. In the north, God sends this prophet to Jeroboam and says, if you're faithful, I'm going to bless you. You will never be a Davidic king. You're not supposed to be a Davidic king. You're just a caretaker until the real king, the Christ, shows up and can unite everybody together. Do this, be just and compassionate, and things will go well for you. So he's steward king, and things are going really well, but the problem is, wow, it's going so well, he's becoming wealthy and powerful. And like Solomon, power and wealth corrupt him. And the problem is, in the south, that if you're Jewish, the temple is in the south. The only place you can worship is the south. You can pray anywhere, only worship in one place. That's the temple. And 3 times a year, and I love this, 3 times a year, all Hebrews have to go to Jerusalem and stand before the face of God. So just a little test, because I love this. What is the face of God? What? I'm kind of deaf, so you have to. Oh, thank God. Yes, bread and wine. So remember, every Sabbath you have to offer the lechem hapanim, the bread of the face of God. And there's an altar, then the ark, the tabernacle, and the priest 3 times a year will pick up the entire altar with the bread on it, take it out to the courtyard where all the Jews are, Hebrew, and lift up the bread and say, behold God's love for you. So I love that hold up the bread, behold God's love for you. So 3 times a year, they're always going down. So their heart is always in the south, because that's where you have to travel to worship. Does that make sense? And the Stuart king up north finds that irritating. It's a weakness on his power. So he comes up with this idea that he's going to build 2 temples up north. one in the very north, one in the south, and that way nobody else will ever have to go down to Jerusalem. But the problem is, when he builds a temple, now that's a big problem because God didn't tell him to do that. Nobody gets to build their own temple. Only God does. And guess what he puts in the middle of both these temples? You have to really speak loud because once again, what? Oh, good job, a golden calf. For them, not really an idol, it is to us. But once again, he says, this is Yahweh. Yahweh's going to give us power and wealth. I don't know why we can't get that one right. But human beings always end up worshiping power and wealth. And then he ordains his own priests, not allowed to do that. Sets up his own liturgical calendar. And everything about worship was politically to support him. So God sends Amos to speak the truth. So who is Amos? Amos was just a farmer and rancher. So was my grandfather. And God's message was their worship is really a bunch of BS. And as a rancher and a farmer, I know BS. And so the king employed all these false prophets who would just promote the king's agenda. And they accused him, you shut up. You're no prophet. We're paid as prophets. Amos says, yeah, I'm not paid. I didn't want to do this. I'm happy back on the farm. I didn't want to have to do this. God kept coming to me. I'm not getting paid for this. I'm only doing because God asked me. And the false prophets are promoting this worship of money and power. And then they think they're devoted to God. So he warns them. God said, if you continue worshiping power and wealth, the north will come to an end. And it does. Assyria comes in and conquers the 10 tribes. Have you ever heard about the lost tribes? They're lost because they're conquered and get mixed in with other groups. But it's interesting what Amos says about worshiping the wrong image of God leads to your destruction. And the odd part is, he says this when they're going through this massive economic boom. So what Amos says seems to be impossible. And a big part of Amos's message is that all this worship is just creating more division between them and God and them and each other. The one thing God doesn't want is more division. So in Amos, if you study his speeches, bad worship leads to the abuse of human beings. And simultaneously, abuse of human beings, dehumanizing people around them, leads to false worship. Kind of a chicken and egg problem. I'm going to just read some of Amos's writings because they're so harsh and provocative. Because think the economy is booming. And Amos says, hear this, you who trample down the needy, you who destroy the poor of the land. Some of you are getting very rich off others and trampling down those who are impoverished. Ask yourself, when will the new moon be over so we can sell our grain, or the Sabbath so that we may display the wheat? So in this odd way, this sounds kind of strange. They're following all the right liturgical rules and regulations on how to worship, but they're worshiping the golden calf. So it really doesn't matter how precisely they're worshiping, you're worshiping the wrong thing. Does that make sense? So you could be doing everything liturgically correct, all your hand possessors the same, but you're worshiping, and they say they're worshiping Yahweh, but they're not. They're worshiping power and wealth. So Amos says, you diminish the fa'ah and add to the shekel and fix your scales for cheating. So even when they're at worship, they're just trying to think of new ways to cheat people. You buy the lowly for silver and the poor for a pair of sandals. And so the Lord God has sworn by the pride of Jacob, never will I forget what you have done. This odd part is, and I know I make a big deal about this, so I'm going to repeat it. Have you ever heard that commandment, thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain? You know, people think it means to say GD. You got to be kidding me. I mean, yeah, we teach second graders that because it's too complicated. But it's not what you say. The Hebrew is, do not carry out the Lord's name in vain. And it means a verb. Don't say, I'm doing this for God, when it's really not. It's a commandment against misusing religion for power and wealth or war or division. Does that make sense? And think in thousands of years, religion, when it gets off track, God sends the prophets. And they're doing everything liturgically correct, but they're taking the Lord's name in vain. Lord's name in vain is not what you say with your mouth. It's what you do in the name of religion. Does that make sense? How many wars have been started because of religion? Or I just hate the televangelists who love to get wealthy off the poor. Does that make sense? That's taking the Lord's name in vain. And in that commandment, when God says, do not take the Lord's name in vain, it's the only one where God says, you do that, and I will not forget it. So once again, he said, you have done these things, and I will not forget it. So the worship is really hard. So anyhow, here's another one that I just think is kind of amazing. What do I care for your number of sacrifices, says the Lord. I have had enough of whole burnt rams and the fat of fatlings. In the blood of calves, lambs, and goats, I find no pleasure. Bring me no more worthless offerings. Your incense is loathsome to me. Make justice your aim. Redress the wrong. Hear the orphan's plea and the widow. Now that's actually from Isaiah. But you can see the prophets spoke out against the misuse of religion, worship, for the wrong thing. God is not against worship. He's the one who commanded. But don't try and replace God with a golden calf and then say, we're worshiping correct because we're following all the rules. Does that make any sense? God hates that. So you have to ask that about us as well. If the prophets have a message of a community that worships, but worships with a right heart, that worships not for getting gold or popularity or power, but to have hearts more of love. Or another one about the community that the Christ will start, they prophesy it'll be the community of the humble. So Nahum, who nobody ever hears about this prophet, he writes this poetry of the prophecy about the fall of Nineveh. But the problem is, in the beginning, he never really mentions Nineveh. He says all the nations will be judged and fade away. No nation is going to survive. The only human community that will remain forever is the humble, who are united. So they have this vision of this community the Messiah will come, bring, and they'll be humble. They'll not worship the golden calf or politics and power. They won't worship anything that pollutes religion, but they'll be part of this vast community of the humble. So Nahum is really not speaking about the fall of Nineveh. He's talking about the fall of all nations. Everyone will fall away. Only one will survive. Now, in Ezekiel, you see that, I love this. Ezekiel in chapter 9 sees that those who belong to God, he has this vision. There's this man who's clothed in linen, which means he's a priest, and he's told to mark on the forehead those who sigh and groan over the abominations of, religious people abusing the poor. And does that make sense? If anybody that breaks your heart when religion is turned to evil, if that breaks your heart, this priest tells him to mark on their forehead a cross, a dao, on their forehead of those who mourn over fake worship. If they belong to the family of God, they will have this cross on their forehead. So the cross is the tau. It's a Greek letter. So anyhow, it looks a lot like a cross. Does that make sense? And it symbolizes humility. So remember, you're speaking about this community of the humble who won't take the Lord's name in vain. They worship for love. And it symbolizes humility. So the tau on your, St. Francis takes the tau as a symbol because the Franciscan order was supposed to treasure humility. Now, by the way, do you know when all of you were marked with a tau? Oh, good. Yeah. So there's also this theme of truth and honesty. And in Greek, aletheia is the word for truth. But truth doesn't mean having all the right catechetical answers. It's how you've chosen how you live. So the truth, as John says, is love. And altheon, very similar word, means truth in action. We would say authenticity. So remember when Jesus meets the woman at the well, and they argue about worship? And he said, soon people will worship in spirit and truth. But when it says truth, the word is altheon, which really should be translated authenticity. The worship Christ wants and the prophets preached about is worship is supposed to make us authentic. Worship is not supposed to be about condemning others, not about us feeling better, not about putting on a show, not about we worship to get powerful. God wants us to worship to make us more altheon, more and more authentic. For the prophets, the greatest sin was idolatry, worshiping things in place of God. Now that doesn't mean, suddenly you're going to start worshiping Baal. You're going to call it God, but it's really not God. So the prophets are upset when, worship follows all the right rules and regulations, but it's not met with authentic living. This angers me as well. So I'm going to talk about something uncomfortable, but, my priesthood, 35 years, has changed so much. Really, it's amazing. One time we had these things called housekeepers? Now I'm microwaving my own dinner. We had housekeepers, and as one old priest says, and I think this is funny, he said this about 20 years ago, this old priest says, at one time we were gods. And he says, now we're hated. And you know why he was right about that? It was the sexual abuse scandal. And, just to wear a collar, immediately, even to this day, people suspect that you could be a, pedophile. Even though technically, not just technically, you're least likely to be abused by a priest. Doesn't matter. And it wasn't, there's very few pedophile priests. Where was the problem? With bishops. They allowed it. And here's the odd part. Now, Idaho did not we didn't have a pedophilia scandal. We had Bishop Trinan, very holy guy, who didn't allow it. We had Todd Brown, who, the moment there was a red flag, he was on it. And I'm just going to be critical. Todd Brown was kind of prophetic because he tells this story. Now, this is good. When do I end? I'm over. 10 minutes? 5 minutes then. I'll try and be quick and get back to this. But it's a long story. So Todd Brown said, do you know how I became a bishop? He said, in my class, I was sent to Rome, and everybody in my class, except for one guy who had huge skeletons, all became bishops. And I was so naive. I said, wow, there must be a lot of talent in that class. And he said, no, this is how Rome works. It's an old boys network. I was put into this system, and I knew as a seminarian, I was chosen to be a bishop. That it's all this old boys network. And I was shocked. Does that make sense? And he said, they put you in this program so that you advance by being the most obedient. And so these bishops, they didn't ever let the abuse out because they were trained to maintain the image, not the truth. Remember, the prophets spoke about, in Christ, worshiping in truth and authenticity. The one thing they didn't want is authenticity. Does that make sense? And the cardinal and all those in the Vatican knew about the abuse, and the order was to cover it up. Do you see how? And then they worship God. And at that time period, there's all these harsh rules and regulations from the Vaticans on how to worship. I'm not against the rules and regulations, but you think that was the fight you needed to be in? Does that make any sense? So I take the prophet's command of authentic worship quite serious. The letter of Jude, so amazing, because the letter of Jude, one of the apostles, he's working on this other letter that we don't ever have, and he writes another letter because there's an emergency in the church. He says, I was writing a letter, I'm working hard on this other letter, but I have to stop it because there's a problem in the community, and worship has become a show without moral conviction. And he says it needs to stop. In our midst, there are those, Jude is saying, the Apostle Jude, who are paganizing Christianity and making it more about a public show. So what would the prophet say about our worship here at Holy Apostles? Does it make us more authentic, or does it just put on a show so that we can cover up our sins? And the prophets, like Isaiah and Ezekiel, they care deeply about God's holiness. They speak about incense and vestments and sacred. They love a sense of awe. So they'd be home at a solemn mass. They believe sacrifice should be transforming. That's why the fourth part of mass, even in Jewish worship, when the deacon says, go because you are sent, means you're supposed to put love into action. You're supposed to put the Eucharist into action. And so the prophets, they cared about the poor and the rejected, and how we're going to solve the problem of injustice is through authentic worship. So prophets always criticized worship without conversion. They criticized clerical insulation from suffering, any priesthood that protects itself over the truth or even suffering of other people, the prophets railed against. So does that make any sense? And can I tell you a worse story, or do I have time? Do I have time? Okay, so don't tell anyone. But thank God this isn't getting recorded. I don't care. So I was talking to 3 of the seminarians, and I said, how do you like your seminary? They hate it. And I love this, absolutely 1,000% love the seminary. I said, well, what do you hate about it? Well, we like our classes, but you have to play this game in the seminary of being kind of playing like, what was that character on MASH, the priest, Mulcahy? Father Mulcahy. You have to be, hi, good morning, oh, nice, and you kind of bow, and you never really show too much, and so they said, they're just teaching you to put on a game. Isn't that sad? So remember, the prophets and Christ wanted a worship that led to authenticity. That we celebrate our oneness, our command to bring love into the world, not put on a show. It takes the Lord's name in vain. So I feel like I've spoken long enough. So I kind of forget what we're doing now.
We've got it.
Okay, there you go. But my final question is, what would the prophet say about our worship? Does it lead us to be authentic, Or does a worship just cover up our secret lives? Sorry, it ended kind of
That's a
sadly.
great summary.
On time.
Wow.
Wonderful.
We'll be brief.
We will.
Not really.
So turn to page 14.
We still get more questions.
We'll kind of whip through the questions real quick and then release you. So Mary?
Oh, I forgot.
Did you want to say something? In his reflection, Father Len said, the Eucharist is a verb.
Well, last night.
Yeah, or this morning, or
Was it this morning?
earlier he said that. I got mixed up a little.
Roll with it.
After receiving the Eucharist, how do you see it shaping the way you live, especially in how you treat the poor, the difficult, or those who think differently than you?
The prophets called for worship that leads to authenticity, not performance. Where in your life might God be inviting you to deeper, authentic worship? Where your prayer and your daily actions more fully match?
The prophets warned that worship can become a show instead of a source of compassion. A prophetic community is more concerned about living out the worship rather than just adhering to liturgical rules. As a parish community, how can we at St. Pius ensure that our worship continues to form us into people of mercy, justice, and unity?
In the Narnia image, we didn't discuss this, but the rest of the question holds up, I think. In the Narnia image, we reach the promised land by holding on to Christ and by holding on to one another, even when some feel less mature or less strong. How have others in our parish helped carry you at different times in your faith? How might God be inviting you to help carry someone else now?
Okay, so you'll have a few minutes in here to do some personal reflection, then we'll head back. There are some snacks on the table. Those will be the last snacks, so if you're hungry, now's the time on the way back. And then we'll lead you from there. We have a lot of excitement still to come, so.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
See you back.